A family vacation on the coast sounded tempting, but not under those conditions. While his wife was busy with household chores, the husband was enthusiastically chatting on the phone with his relatives, handing out promises left and right. "Come on over, Mom and Dad, bring all the grandkids, stay at her little place by the ocean until fall if you want. My wife will take time off at her own expense and feed everyone." He got so carried away that he didn't notice his wife appearing right behind him. "Hello, dear listeners. I'm glad to welcome you to my channel. Today I'm bringing you a new and interesting story. Enjoy listening." Jessica ran her palm along the display of nail polishes. Rows of little bottles tempted her with shades ranging from pale pink to deep burgundy. The prices on the tags made her sigh. $20 for a single bottle. She turned and headed for the exit of the cosmetics store, stuffing her hands into the pockets of her old jacket. At home, in a dresser drawer, she had a cheap $1 nail polish from China. She painted her nails with it herself on Sundays, sitting in the kitchen with the fan on so the smell would air out faster. Brandon once grimaced when he looked at her hands. "What kind of cheap manicure is that? You should go to a proper salon." Jessica stayed silent and slid her hands under the table. A salon manicure cost $30. With that money, she could buy 2 sets of bed sheets at Target or put it toward her dream. And she had only one dream. An apartment by the sea. A small studio that smelled of salt and where you could hear the waves. A place where you could wake up in the morning, throw open the window, and see not gray high-rises, but endless blue. Jessica had been saving for 5 years. Methodically, almost obsessively. She worked as an accountant at a small trading company and took home $2,000 a month. For Chicago, that was laughable money. Brandon made $3,200 working as a sales manager and considered his salary the family budget. At least that's what he said whenever she timidly suggested that maybe they should save more together for an apartment or a vacation. "Jess, I'm the one supporting both of us," he replied, scrolling through his phone. "Utilities, groceries, it's all on me. Your $2,000 is just pocket money. For clothes, for all that girly stuff." He said it easily, without malice, just stating it as a fact. And Jessica didn't argue, because arguing meant fighting, proving, explaining. She got tired of explaining in the very first year of their marriage, when she realized Brandon genuinely believed his money mattered more. After all, he earned more, so he was the boss. But she spent her $2,000 exactly the way she wanted. Or rather, she barely spent it at all. $400 went to food. She bought the cheapest options: grains, pasta, chicken, vegetables on sale. Brandon sometimes complained that he was sick of buckwheat, but he never volunteered to cook himself, so he ate whatever was put in front of him. $200 went to transportation and phone service. $120 for household odds and ends. Everything else went into savings. Every month, Jessica transferred $1,300, sometimes more if she managed to pick up extra work, onto a separate card hidden in an old wallet at the bottom of the closet. The side gig started in her second year of saving. Jessica's friend Lisa, who owned a small online children's clothing store, asked her to help with accounting. $100 for a weekend. Jessica agreed, even though Saturdays and Sundays turned into workdays. Brandon was surprised. "Where are you going?" "It's the weekend." To a friend's, Jessica lied. "We'll chat, have some tea." He shrugged and went back to playing video games. Jessica drove to Lisa's place, sat over documents until evening, got $100 in cash, and slipped it into an envelope. Then there were 2 envelopes, then 5. She bought clothes at thrift stores. She learned how to find almost new items with tags still on them for $5 to $7. Brandon grimaced whenever she brought home another blouse. "What, did you pull that out of a dumpster?" "It's a thrift store," Jessica replied without looking up. "People don't eat clothes." "You're like some kind of pauper," he smirked. "My wife walks around in rags." Was she embarrassed? No. She didn't care. She saw the numbers in her account growing and growing, and that warmed her more than any $100 blouse ever could. She barely used makeup. Mascara and lipstick from the drugstore. Foundation once every 2 months. Brandon occasionally paid her a compliment. "You look good today." If I bought a $60 face cream, I'd lose 6% of my monthly savings target. No thanks. Let my face go without cream. I'll have an apartment by the sea with a mountain view instead. Brandon didn't know about her nest egg. Or rather, he knew she was saving something, but he thought the amounts were symbolic. Once he asked, "So, how much have you saved up?" $5,000? About that, Jessica lied. At that point, there were $17,000 in the account. He laughed. Well, that's a drop in the bucket, of course, but it's something. She stayed quiet and didn't explain that this drop would turn into an ocean if you didn't spill it on pointless things. Brandon lived for today. A new phone every year. Sneakers for $400. Hanging out with friends at bars on Fridays, $50 a night. He could drop $150 on sushi just because he felt like it. And Jessica could eat buckwheat with eggs for 3 days straight, just to put that $150 into savings. Their wedding 3 years earlier had been modest. Or rather, Jessica wanted it modest, but Brandon's parents insisted on a restaurant. Patricia, Brandon's mother, a woman with a short haircut and a perpetually dissatisfied expression, declared, "We're not poor people. Others should see that our son is marrying properly." Properly cost $12,000. Jessica and Brandon split it evenly. She paid $6,000 out of her savings, and it hurt like pulling a tooth without anesthesia. The guests ate salad, drank champagne, and congratulated the newlyweds. Brandon's parents gave them an envelope. Jessica opened it at home after the reception. Inside were $200. She stood in the kitchen holding the bills, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. $200. For their son's wedding. Brandon shrugged. Well, they're on a small pension. What do you expect? A month later, Patricia called Jessica. Her voice was sweet, almost apologetic. "Jessica, dear, we've had a bit of trouble here. Your father-in-law needs to buy some medication, and we're short on money until the pension comes in. Could you lend us $200? Until the first of the month, I swear we'll pay you back." Jessica was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "Patricia, what about the $200 you gave us for the wedding?" "Oh, Jess, that was a gift," her mother-in-law interrupted, her voice turning metallic. "What does that have to do with this? We're family. We're supposed to help each other." Jessica gave them $200 from her savings, because not giving it would mean starting a fight, becoming the greedy daughter-in-law, ruining the relationship. Brandon said, "Thanks, Jess, you did the right thing helping them." Of course, the money was never returned. On the first of the month, Patricia didn't call. Jessica didn't remind her. What was the point? 3 years passed after that. Brandon's parents never came to visit. Not once. Jessica was surprised at first. They lived in the same city, just a different part of Chicago. It wasn't another country. You could get there by subway in an hour. But Patricia always found excuses. "Oh, Brandon, my back hurts, I can't make the trip. Your father caught a cold, I don't want to get you sick. We started renovations here, no time at all." But she called regularly. In the evenings, while Jessica was washing dishes or folding laundry, Brandon would put the call on speaker, and his mother's voice would fill the apartment. "Brandon, sweetheart, how are you? Does Jessica cook well? You're not starving there, are you? Your father and I don't go anywhere, we just sit at home. All our friends have already been to the beach, and we're still stuck here within 4 walls. Good daughters-in-law take their mothers-in-law to resorts, you know." Jessica clenched her lips and kept scrubbing the plate. Brandon mumbled something vague. "Well, Mom, we haven't gone anywhere ourselves yet." "You're young, you still have time," Patricia shot back. "We're old. We need to work on our health. Sea air, sunshine." The hints came regularly, but nothing went beyond words. Brandon didn't have the money to take his parents south, and he didn't really have the desire either. And Jessica stayed silent, because her money wasn't up for discussion. One day, Patricia did come after all. In spring, in April. She called the day before. "Brandon, I'll stop by tomorrow to see you. I miss you." Jessica heard that and felt herself tense up. Brandon was happy. "Of course, Mom, come on over." We'll be waiting. Her mother-in-law arrived on Saturday, around lunchtime. Jessica cleaned the apartment until it shone, cooked borscht, chopped salad, bought pastries. Patricia walked in, looked around the entryway, pursed her lips. "Oh, it's kind of cramped in here. You really should look for a bigger place." Jessica stayed silent as she took her coat. Brandon fussed. "Mom, come on, we're fine here. Come in, sit down." Patricia went into the room, sat on the couch, looked around the walls. "These wallpapers should be replaced. They've completely faded." Jessica served tea. Her mother-in-law took a sip, set the cup down. "Not enough sugar. I like it sweeter." Jessica brought the sugar bowl. Patricia added 3 spoonfuls, stirred, took another sip. "And Marina, Brandon's sister, you remember? They have a big, bright apartment. 3 rooms. Sure, they'll be paying off the mortgage until they're old, but at least it's spacious." Brandon nodded in agreement. Jessica sat on the edge of a chair, hands folded in her lap, waiting for it all to end. Patricia stayed for 2 days. She slept on the couch in the living room. Brandon and Jessica slept on a folding cot in the kitchen. Her mother-in-law talked about acquaintances, complained about her health, criticized TV shows. Jessica cooked, fried, washed dishes, listened. Brandon hid in the kitchen with his laptop, supposedly working. Before leaving, Patricia said, "Jessica, you're hardworking, and the borscht was tasty, but your housekeeping isn't great. I saw dust on top of the cabinet, and you should repot the plants. They're wilting." Jessica nodded. "Okay, Patricia, I'll keep that in mind." Her mother-in-law left. Jessica closed the door behind her and rested her forehead against the doorframe. Brandon came out of the room and put an arm around her shoulders. "Don't be offended. That's just how my mom is. You'll get used to it." Jessica didn't answer. She just slipped out of his embrace, went to the kitchen, poured herself some water, sat down at the table, took out her phone, and opened her banking app. There were already $32,000 in the account. Just a little more. 1 more year, maybe a year and a half. She sipped the water in small gulps and imagined opening the window in a seaside studio, the salty wind fluttering the curtains, seagulls crying over the waves. The winter of 2024 was gray and endless. Jessica worked, saved, calculated. On weekends, she drove to Lisa's place, stared at reports until she felt numb, earned $100, sometimes $130 if there was more work. Brandon got used to her spending Saturdays and Sundays with friends and didn't ask questions. He didn't care. He played video games, met up with friends, watched football. Jessica didn't complain. She tried not to complain at all. Complaints require energy, and she spent her energy on work and on her dream. By spring 2025, there were $68,000 in the account. Jessica started browsing real estate websites. Virginia Beach, Myrtle Beach, Destin. Small studios, 270 to 320 square feet, renovated or not. Prices jumped from $60,000 to $120,000. She was looking for something in between. Not a falling apart shack, but not a luxury complex either. At the end of April, she found it. A studio in Myrtle Beach, 300 square feet, 5th floor, with a balcony and an ocean view. Light cosmetic repairs, furnished. Exactly $80,000. Jessica wrote to the seller, took a day off work, and went to see it in person. She told Brandon she had a work errand, that she needed to deliver documents to the tax office in another district. The apartment turned out to be exactly like in the photos. Small, neat, bright. The windows faced south, and between the rooftops of neighboring buildings you could see a strip of blue ocean. Jessica stood on the balcony, breathing in the warm air that smelled of salt and pine, and felt something inside her unfold and straighten. This was it. This was what she had lived on buckwheat and thrift store blouses for 5 years for. The seller, an elderly woman, said, "If you're taking it, decide quickly. There are a lot of interested buyers." Jessica nodded. "I'll take it. I'll send the deposit today." A week later, the deal was done. Jessica transferred $80,000, signed the papers, and received the keys. The apartment was registered in her name. Only in her name. She rode back to Chicago on a bus, clutching the ownership certificate in her hand and smiling. For the first time in a long while, she was smiling for real. Not out of politeness, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. At home, Brandon asked, "So how did it go? Did you drop off the documents?" "I did," Jessica replied. He nodded and went back to the TV. Jessica walked into the bedroom, hid the certificate in a folder with important papers, deep in the closet. "I won't say anything yet. It's not time." But she couldn't and didn't want to stay silent forever. She was just waiting for the right moment. The moment came in May, one evening when Brandon was scrolling through his feed and stumbled upon a post from an acquaintance vacationing in South Carolina. Photos of the ocean, the beach, the boardwalk. "Man," Brandon sighed, "it must be nice there. We could go too." Jessica was sitting next to him on the couch, reading a book. She looked up. "Why don't we go to our own apartment instead?" Brandon looked up from his phone and stared at her. "What apartment?" "Mine. In Myrtle Beach." He was silent for a few seconds, processing it, then slowly asked, "You bought an apartment on the coast?" "Yep." "When?" "A month ago." Brandon sat up straighter and put his phone aside. Wait, are you serious?" Jessica took out her phone, opened the photos she had taken during the showing, and handed it to him. Brandon took it, scrolled, whistled. "Wow. I had no idea you were saving for this." "I was saving for a lot of things," Jessica said calmly. He handed the phone back and shook his head. "How much did it cost?" $80,000. 80? Brandon's eyes widened. "Where did you get 80,000? "I saved. For 5 years." He fell silent, clearly doing the math in his head. Then he said, with newfound respect, "Jess, you're impressive. I honestly didn't think you could pull something like this off." Jessica smirked. "There's a lot I can do." Brandon took her phone again and looked through the photos one more time. His face turned thoughtful. "We should show this to my parents. They'll be thrilled." Jessica felt something tense up inside. She took the phone back. "Why would we show it to them?" "What do you mean, why?" Brandon was surprised. "It's great news. Mom is always complaining that she never gets to go to the ocean, and here we have a ready-made apartment." "Brandon, this is my apartment," Jessica said slowly and clearly. "Bought with my money. I'll decide who I show it to." He frowned. "What's with you?" "We're family." "Family is you and me," Jessica replied. "Not your parents." Brandon got offended. For 2 days he walked around sulky, answering in monosyllables. Jessica didn't pay attention. She was used to his sulks. They happened regularly whenever something didn't go according to his plan. Usually, he got over it in a couple of days. On the 3rd day, he started talking normally again and acted like he'd forgotten the conversation about his parents. But Jessica knew he hadn't. And indeed, Brandon hadn't forgotten. He had just gone quiet for a while, waiting. Jessica sensed it in small things. He started mentioning his parents more often in conversation, talking about how they were doing, complaining about his mother's health, as if he were preparing the ground. One evening, while they were having dinner in the kitchen, he said, "By the way, Mom asked how we're doing. I told her everything's fine." Jessica stirred her tea without looking up. "Uh-huh. She says they turned off the heat for renovations, and they're sitting there freezing." Dad's coughing. "They should buy a space heater," Jessica replied. Brandon grimaced. "You've gotten kind of cold." "I've gotten realistic," she looked up at him. "They have a pension, they have their own apartment. We're not obligated to solve all their problems." He didn't respond, but pressed his lips together. Jessica knew the conversation wasn't over, just postponed. A week later, Brandon went out with friends. He came back late, a little drunk, noisily undressing in the entryway. Jessica was already in bed, reading before sleep. He flopped down next to her, smelling of alcohol. "Listen, Dimitri was saying today that they have a place near Naperville. They hang out there all summer with their parents, grilling, barbecues. Pretty cool." Jessica turned the page. "Sounds nice." That's what I think too, Brandon continued, getting comfortable. Families are supposed to spend time together. And now we have a place too. On the coast. Jessica closed the book, set it on the nightstand, and turned toward him. Brandon, we already talked about this. Oh, come on. He waved his hand. Why are you so uptight? So what if my parents come for a week? Relax a bit. What, are you that stingy with space? She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. What happened to you? You weren't like this before. Before, I didn't have an apartment on the coast, Jessica replied, turning her back to him. Now I do. And it's mine. Only mine. Brandon muttered something else, but she didn't listen. She closed her eyes and pulled the blanket up over her shoulder. He fell asleep about 10 minutes later and started snoring. Jessica lay awake for a long time, staring into the darkness. A dull irritation was growing inside her. She knew he wouldn't let this go. The May holidays passed quietly. Brandon worked some of the days, Jessica caught up on sleep, cleaned the apartment, watched shows. One weekend they walked through the park, ate ice cream, talked about nothing. It was almost good, almost like before, when they had just started dating and hadn't yet worn each other down with everyday life. But in early June, everything changed. Jessica came home from work and saw Brandon in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with his phone in his hand, intently typing something. Hearing her steps, he looked up and smiled. Hey! How was your day? Fine, Jessica replied, kicking off her shoes in the entryway. I'm tired. Did you make dinner? No, I just got back myself. Let's order pizza. She frowned. Pizza was $40, and there was chicken and vegetables in the fridge. I'll just fry the meat. It'll be quick. Brandon shrugged. Whatever you want. Jessica changed clothes, came back into the kitchen, and started cooking. Brandon stayed glued to his phone, typing, chuckling to himself. Jessica cut up the chicken, tossed it into the pan, salted it. Who are you texting? Oh, my brother, Brandon replied without looking up. Dennis is asking how things are. Dennis was Brandon's younger brother. He lived in the suburbs with his wife and 2 kids. Worked at some factory, didn't make much, constantly complained about money. Jessica barely knew him. They'd seen each other a couple of times over 3 years at family gatherings. Dennis was loud, pushy, liked to slap shoulders and tell long stories about his job. Say hi for me, Jessica said, stirring the chicken. Brandon nodded, still typing. Jessica set the table and called him to dinner. They ate in silence, occasionally glancing at each other. Brandon looked pleased, even too pleased. Jessica grew worried but didn't ask anything. The next day, coming home from work, she went into the bathroom to wash her face and heard Brandon talking on the phone in the bedroom. His voice was quiet, cautious, almost conspiratorial. Jessica froze and listened. Yes, Mom, I'm serious. Of course she doesn't mind. No, I already talked to her, everything's fine. Jessica wiped her face with a towel, walked out of the bathroom, and went into the bedroom. Brandon was sitting on the couch with the phone pressed to his ear. Seeing her, he flinched and quickly said, Mom, I'll call you back later, okay? Yeah. Bye. He ended the call, put the phone on his lap, and smiled guiltily. That was my mom. Just calling to chat. Jessica crossed her arms. Brandon, what were you telling her? Nothing, he shrugged too casually. She was asking how we're doing. And you told her that I don't mind something? Jessica clarified. Brandon hesitated and rubbed the back of his head. Jess, listen, Mom's been complaining all May that they haven't gone anywhere, that summer is going to waste. I just said that now we have a place to relax, generally speaking. Jessica felt a chill spread inside her. You told her about the apartment. So what? Generally speaking, he repeated, avoiding her gaze. I just mentioned that we now have a place on the coast. Mine, Jessica corrected sharply. I have a place on the coast. Not we. Brandon threw his hands up. Jess, what difference does it make? We're husband and wife. It makes a huge difference. Jessica stepped closer, looking down at him. It's my property. I earned it. I decide who goes there. I didn't say they're going. Brandon protested. I just mentioned it. Am I not allowed to talk? Jessica took a deep breath and exhaled. Talking now was pointless. He was already worked up, and next would come shouting, accusations, slammed doors. She turned around and walked out of the room. Brandon shouted after her, "You've really changed. You've gotten greedy." Jessica closed the kitchen door, sat down at the table, dropped her head into her hands, breathed slowly, counted to 10. Inside, everything was boiling. She knew where this was headed. She knew Patricia was already processing the information, figuring out how to benefit from it, and Brandon would be her conduit. As always. For 2 days, they barely spoke. Brandon sulked, Jessica stayed silent. They left for work in the mornings, came back in the evenings, ate dinner in silence, retreated to opposite corners. Jessica even welcomed the quiet. At least she didn't have to pretend everything was fine. On the third day, Saturday morning, Brandon's brother Dennis called. Jessica was in the kitchen, making coffee. She heard Brandon answer the phone in the bedroom and cheerfully say, "Dennis, how's it going, bro?" Jessica grew alert. Brandon rarely called his brother bro, only when he wanted to ask for something or seem generous. Brandon's voice was muffled through the closed door. Jessica caught fragments. "Yeah, all good." Listen, did Mom tell you?" "Well, yeah, can you believe it?" "No, seriously." Jessica stepped closer to the door and listened. "Listen, why don't you guys come over? At least for a week. Come on, the kids will be happy." "No, I'm serious, there's plenty of space." Jessica flung the door open. Brandon was sitting on the couch with the phone to his ear and jumped when he saw her. She stepped into the room and held out her hand. "Give me the phone." He froze and pressed the phone to his chest. "Jess, I'm on the phone." "Give me the phone," Jessica repeated, steel in her voice. Brandon reluctantly handed it over. Jessica took it and brought it to her ear. "Dennis, hi. This is Jessica." There was confused silence on the other end, then Dennis's voice. "Oh, hey, Jess. What's up?" "Nothing special," Jessica replied calmly. "I just want to clarify something. Brandon promised you something about the coast." Dennis hesitated. "Well, he said that you now have a little apartment there. Like, it would be possible to come by in the summer." "Not possible," Jessica said. "I have an apartment, not we. And I didn't invite anyone." Dennis let out a short, awkward laugh. "Come on, Jess, what's the big deal?" Brandon said it was fine. Brandon was mistaken, Jessica cut him off. "All the best." She ended the call and handed the phone back to Brandon. He took it and stared at her as if she had slapped him across the face. "What are you doing?" "That's my brother." "Your brother," Jessica repeated. "Exactly. Not mine. He just wanted to take the kids to the ocean." "Then let him rent a place," Jessica replied, "like normal people do." Brandon jumped up from the couch and started pacing the room. "I don't understand what's happened to you. You used to be normal, and now God knows what, greedy, angry." "I started protecting my boundaries," Jessica said quietly. "That's what happened to me." "Boundaries?" Brandon mocked. "What boundaries? We're family." "Family is when you ask for permission," Jessica answered. "Not when you hand out promises at my expense." Brandon went silent, breathing heavily. Then he grabbed his phone, stormed out of the room, and slammed the door. Jessica remained standing in the middle of the room. Her hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists and took a deep breath. She didn't regret it for a single second. Brandon spent the rest of the day out of the house. He left somewhere, came back late at night when Jessica was already asleep. He lay down next to her and turned toward the wall. In the morning, he got up before her and left without breakfast. Jessica understood. He was seriously offended. But that was no longer her problem. She was tired of adjusting, tired of being convenient. A week passed. Brandon thawed out and started talking again, but with a chill. Jessica didn't push for closeness. Let him sulk if he wanted to. She worked, came home, cooked dinner, watched shows. Life went on. Then a message came from Patricia. Jessica was at work, checking invoices, when her phone vibrated on the desk. She picked it up and unlocked the screen. A long message from her mother-in-law. Jessica started reading. "Hello, Jessica. Brandon told us that you now have a little apartment on the coast. Well done, of course, for saving up. Your father and I are very happy for you. You understand that family is sacred. Your father and I, and the grandkids too, would really like to rest there in the summer. Nothing special, just a couple of weeks. You wouldn't refuse, would you? Brandon said you don't mind. Right when it's best for us to come. Kisses." Jessica read the message twice, then put the phone face down and clenched her jaw until her teeth ached. Inside, a wave of anger rose cold, calm, merciless. She didn't reply. She simply blocked Patricia, opened her chat with Brandon, and typed briefly, "We need to talk tonight." That evening, Brandon came home tense. Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone lying in front of her. She looked up. "Your mother wrote to me." Brandon froze in the doorway. What did she write? She's asking to stay at the coast for 2 weeks. With the grandkids. She said you promised that I wouldn't mind. Brandon licked his lips. Jess, I didn't promise. I just said I'd ask you. You shouldn't have said anything at all, Jessica interrupted. You had no right. Brandon stepped into the kitchen and sat down across from her. Okay, fine, I'm guilty, I admit it. But listen, they really want to rest. Dad isn't feeling well, the doctors say the sea will help. Mom is asking. They're not strangers, they're parents. Your parents, Jessica repeated for the 10th time. Not mine. Jess, I get that you saved, that it's yours. But can't you help the family just once? Jessica leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. And when did they help me? When we bought a new fridge with my money. When I bought us a couch because the old one fell apart? When I lived on buckwheat for 5 years to save up? Brandon was silent. They gave us $200 for the wedding and asked for it back. They never once came to visit. They constantly hint that I'm a bad daughter-in-law, and now they want to live in my apartment for 2 weeks. At my expense? I'll pay for the groceries, Brandon muttered. You? Jessica smirked. With what money? You have $300 in your account until payday. You spent $100 at the bar with your friends yesterday. Brandon blushed. Okay, I won't pay. But it's such a small thing. You'll just feed them. It's not a small thing, Jessica said sharply. It's a matter of principle. You're giving away what isn't yours. You're deciding how my time, my money, and my property are used without asking. I thought you'd understand, Brandon said quietly. You're kind. Kind doesn't mean stupid, Jessica replied. Brandon stood up, paced the kitchen, then came back. Fine. I'll tell my mom it won't work, but she'll be offended. Let her be offended, Jessica said indifferently. I don't care. Brandon looked at her with a strange expression, as if seeing her for the first time. You've really changed. I just stopped putting up with it, Jessica replied and stood up from the table. Go call your mother. He went into the room. Jessica could hear him talking on the phone first quietly, then louder, then almost shouting. Mom, I can't force her. It's her apartment. I get that you'd like to, but she doesn't agree. Mom, that's enough, it's not my fault. Then silence. Brandon came out of the room looking like a beaten dog. Mom was crying. She'll survive, Jessica shrugged. Brandon went into the bathroom and slammed the door. Jessica stayed in the kitchen, poured herself some water, drank it in small sips. Inside, she felt calm. No guilt at all. Just exhaustion. The next day, during the afternoon, Patricia called Jessica. Jessica declined the call. Her mother-in-law called again. Jessica declined again. A third call. A fourth. Jessica blocked the number. An hour later, a message came from an unknown number. Jessica, this is Patricia. Why aren't you answering? We need to talk. You understand you can't treat family like this. Brandon is very upset. We dreamed our whole lives of visiting the coast. You have the chance to help. Why are you being so cruel? Jessica read it, deleted the message, and blocked that number too. That evening, Brandon came home gloomier than a storm cloud. He dropped his bag in the entryway, walked into the kitchen, and collapsed into a chair. Mom called you, didn't she? She did, Jessica replied, chopping vegetables for a salad. I didn't answer. She said you're cruel. Jessica smirked. That's manipulation. An old trick. Brandon drummed his fingers on the table. Listen, maybe we really should let them come for at least a week. Just so there's no scandal. Jessica set the knife down and turned to him. Brandon, I said no. That's my final decision. But they'll be offended. Let them be offended. And I'll have to deal with it. Mom calls every day, Dad complains. My brother and sister have started texting too. Jessica wiped her hands, walked over to the table, and sat down across from him. Brandon, listen to me carefully. I saved for this apartment for 5 years. I denied myself everything. I worked weekends. I shopped at thrift stores. I didn't paint my nails. I didn't go on vacation so I could save. Do you understand? This is my sacrifice, my work, my apartment. Brandon nodded, staring at the table. And you think I'm going to give it to your family, who in 3 years never once asked how I was doing, who gave $200 and asked for it back, who treats me like hired help? Brandon was silent. No, Jessica said firmly. No way. He looked up. What if I ask? As your husband? Jessica leaned back. You can ask, but the answer will still be no. Brandon stood up, paced the kitchen, and stopped by the window. You know, maybe my mom is right. You've changed. You used to be soft and kind, and now I don't recognize you. I used to be convenient, Jessica corrected him. Now I'm the owner of my own life. Those are different things. Brandon turned around and looked at her for a long time. Then he left the kitchen. Jessica stayed seated at the table, staring out the window. Outside, it was getting dark. The June evening was warm, and through the open window came the scent of blooming trees. She felt no guilt, only relief. Another week passed. Brandon barely spoke to her. He came home, ate dinner, went into the room, sat at the computer or on his phone. Jessica didn't impose. She worked, cooked, went about her business. In the evenings, she read, watched movies, and planned how she would furnish the apartment in Myrtle Beach. Then the most interesting part began. One morning, Jessica woke up to the sound of notifications on her phone. She opened her eyes and picked up the phone from the nightstand. 10 missed messages. All from Brandon's family group chat, where she had been added a year earlier on her mother-in-law's birthday. Jessica opened the chat. The first message was from Dennis, Brandon's brother. Jess, what's wrong with you? Why are you so greedy? Brandon said we could come to your place on the coast. The second was from Marina, Brandon's sister. Jessica, my husband and I wanted to take the kids on vacation in August. Brandon promised you wouldn't mind. The third was from Patricia. Jessica, I don't understand why you refuse to communicate. Family should help each other. We were always happy to help you. Jessica read all the messages. Then slowly, calmly, she typed a reply. Dear relatives, my apartment on the coast is available for short-term rental only. Market rate is $600 per night. No family discounts. If anyone is interested in renting, send me a private message and I will provide payment details. She sent it and left the chat. A minute later, replies started pouring in. Outraged, angry, offended. Jessica didn't read them. She simply turned off notifications and got out of bed. Brandon woke up half an hour later, came into the kitchen, where Jessica was drinking coffee, and stared at her. What did you write in the family chat? The truth, Jessica replied without looking up from her cup. Everyone's furious. Mom is crying. Dennis says you ruined family relationships. I didn't ruin anything, Jessica said calmly. You did, when you made promises without asking. Brandon sat down across from her and grabbed his head. I thought you'd agree. At least for someone. You thought wrong, Jessica said evenly. I don't owe anyone anything. Brandon looked at her. Confused, almost childlike. But they're family. Your family, Jessica repeated. Not mine. He went quiet. Then he stood up and left the kitchen. Jessica finished her coffee, washed the cup, and got ready for work. All day, messages from Brandon's relatives kept coming in. Angry, offended, manipulative. You destroyed the family. Brandon gave his word. How can you be so heartless? Jessica didn't respond. She just blocked them one by one. That evening, Brandon came home pale. Mom is demanding that I divorce you. Jessica, standing at the stove and stirring soup, turned around. And what did you say? Brandon hesitated. I said I'd think about it. Jessica turned off the stove, set the spoon down, and faced him. Think about it. They looked at each other. Brandon was the first to look away. I don't want a divorce. Then explain to your mother that you're an adult man and decide for yourself who you live with, Jessica said. And also explain that my property is mine. Period. Brandon nodded and went into the room. Jessica poured the soup into bowls and called him to dinner. They ate in silence. A couple of days later, Brandon confessed. In the evening, while they were sitting on the couch watching some show on TV, he suddenly said, Jess, there's something I didn't tell you. Jessica hit pause and turned toward him. What? Brandon rubbed his face with his hands. I already promised Marina, her husband, and the kids that they could come in July. For a month. Jessica stayed silent, just looking at him. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. I thought you'd agree. That was before you refused my mom. For a month, Jessica repeated quietly. Marina, her husband, and 3 kids. For a month. Well. Yeah. Jessica stood up from the couch, went into the kitchen, opened a drawer, and took out a printed copy of the apartment documents. She came back and handed them to Brandon. Look. It says owner, Jessica Miller. See? Brandon nodded without looking up. So I make the decisions. Got it? Got it, Brandon whispered. Good, Jessica said, taking the papers back. Then tell Marina that if she wants to stay in my apartment for a month, she should prepare $18,000. 30 days at $600 a night. Brandon lifted his head. You're joking. No, Jessica replied seriously. I'm absolutely serious. If you gave your word, then keep it. Pay for them. Jess, I don't have that kind of money. Then take out a loan, Jessica suggested. Or explain to your sister that you made a mistake. Brandon went pale. But I already gave my word. You gave your word at my expense, Jessica said coldly. That's your problem. Brandon covered his face with his hands. He sat like that for a minute or two. Then he stood up and silently walked out of the room. Jessica heard him talking on the phone in the entryway, quietly, in a guilty voice. Then silence. He came back about 10 minutes later, sat down on the couch, and stared at the floor. Marina said I'm a traitor. Jessica shrugged. You are. You betrayed my trust. Brandon looked up at her. What am I supposed to do now? Learn to ask for permission, Jessica replied, before you hand out promises. Brandon nodded. They didn't speak again that evening. June was coming to an end. Brandon's relatives stopped texting Jessica, apparently realizing it was pointless. Brandon walked around gloomy and barely spoke. Jessica didn't try to cheer him up. Let him think. Let him understand. One evening, she was sitting on the balcony, drinking tea and watching the sunset. Brandon came out and sat down next to her. Jess, are you really going to the coast alone? I am, Jessica answered. And me? She turned to him. What do you think? Brandon was quiet. I'd like to go. Then you'll pay, Jessica said. Like everyone else. How much? $600 a night. As many days as you stay, that's what you pay. Brandon let out a bitter laugh. You seriously want me to pay you to go to your apartment? Absolutely, Jessica replied. You wanted to let your entire family stay there at my expense. Now pay for yourself. Brandon stood up and went back inside. Jessica stayed on the balcony, finishing her tea. Inside, everything was calm. She regretted nothing. July started off brutally hot. Chicago baked, the asphalt seemed to melt, people suffocated in stuffy apartments and offices. Jessica submitted her vacation request. 2 weeks in August. Brandon asked when he found out. You're really going alone? I am, Jessica replied. He didn't argue. He just nodded and turned away. Relatives kept texting Brandon. Jessica saw him frown at his phone, sigh, type something, then delete it. Once he said, Mom says I ruined the family. You did, Jessica corrected. Not me. Brandon didn't respond. Days passed. Brandon remained gloomy, still receiving angry messages from his relatives. And Jessica planned her vacation. She bought bus tickets, made grocery lists, chose books to take with her. She imagined sitting on the balcony with a glass of wine, listening to the sound of the ocean, reading, explaining nothing to anyone, feeding no one, apologizing to no one. It was her dream, and no one had the right to take it away. July passed the halfway mark. Chicago was choking in the heat, asphalt softened underfoot, and the subway reeked of sweat and stale air. Jessica came home from work dreaming of only one thing, getting home, taking a cold shower, and lying under the fan. Lately, Brandon had been coming home late, staying at the office or out with friends. Jessica didn't ask. She didn't care. Their relationship had turned into a cold truce. They said hello in the mornings, sometimes ate dinner together, but conversations were limited to household basics. Buy milk. Pay the internet bill. Call a plumber. They didn't talk about the coast or the relatives. As if that topic didn't exist. But Jessica knew it did. It hung in the air, heavy and sticky, like July heat. Brandon was waiting. His relatives were waiting. Everyone was waiting for her to break, to give in, to say, fine, come. But Jessica had no intention of breaking. One Friday evening, she came home and saw Brandon in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with a bottle of beer, staring at his phone. Hearing her steps, he looked up and gave a strained smile. Hey. How was your day? Fine, Jessica replied, slipping off her shoes. I'm tired. I'll heat up dinner. Brandon stood up, opened the fridge, took out a container with leftover chicken from the day before. Jessica grew alert. Brandon rarely offered to heat food or cook. Usually, he waited for her to do everything. But now he fussed around the stove, put food on plates, set them on the table, even brought napkins. Sit, he said with a smile. Eat, relax. Jessica sat down, took a fork, and ate in silence, feeling his gaze on her. Brandon ate too, mostly picking at his food. Finally, he set the fork down and cleared his throat. Listen, Jess, I've been thinking. Jessica looked up. About what? Well, about the coast. He scratched the back of his head. Maybe we can still work something out. So everyone's happy? Brandon, we've discussed this already, Jessica said tiredly. 100 times. I know, he waved his hands. But just. Look, maybe not for a month, but at least for a week. Let Mom and Dad come, rest a bit. I'll help with money, I'll buy groceries. With what money? Jessica interrupted. You have $200 left until payday. Brandon winced. I'll borrow from Dimitri. So you won't pay it back? Jessica asked. He blushed. I will pay it back. Like you paid your mom back the $200? Jessica leaned back in her chair. Brandon, enough. The answer is no. And it will stay no. Brandon clenched his fists on the table. But why? Why are you so stubborn? Because it's mine, Jessica replied calmly, and I don't owe anyone anything. Brandon stood up, paced the kitchen, and stopped by the window. You know, Mom says you ruined me. That I've become whipped. Jessica smirked. Whipped is someone who listens to his wife. You don't listen to me. You make promises behind my back. Brandon turned around. I'm trying to keep a relationship with my family. With your family, Jessica corrected. Not mine. Brandon stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door. Jessica finished dinner, washed the dishes, went into the bedroom, lay down on the bed, and buried her face in the pillow. Inside, there was emptiness. Even the anger was gone. Only exhaustion remained. A week passed. Brandon walked around gloomier than ever, barely speaking. Jessica didn't try to reconnect. She was tired of being the peacemaker. On Saturday evening, Brandon brought up the coast again. They were in the living room. Jessica was reading a book. Brandon was watching something on his laptop. Suddenly he closed it and turned to her. Jess, let me at least go with you in August. Just the two of us. No relatives. Jessica looked up from her book. For money? Brandon grimaced. Not for free, right? $600 a night, Jessica reminded him. 2 weeks is $8,400. Brandon went pale. Are you messing with me? No, Jessica replied. You wanted to let your relatives stay there for free. Now you pay yourself. Brandon jumped up from the couch. I'm your husband, not some random guest. A husband who gives away my property without asking, Jessica clarified. That's worse than a guest. Brandon grabbed a pillow from the couch and threw it into the corner. What the hell happened to you? You've turned into some kind of fury. Jessica closed the book and set it on her lap. I turned into someone who knows how to protect her boundaries. It's called growing up. Brandon shook his head and left the room. Jessica heard the front door slam. He left. He came back late at night, drunk and loud, collapsed on the couch fully dressed. Jessica covered him with a blanket, turned off the light, and went to bed. She felt sorry for him. A little. But not enough to change her decision. The end of July was especially brutal. Temperatures climbed past 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The apartment was suffocating, the fan just pushed hot air around. Jessica barely slept at night, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, dreaming of August, of the ocean, of the cool breeze on the balcony. Brandon started staying at work even later. Sometimes he didn't come home at all, texting that he was staying at a friend's place. Jessica didn't object. She even liked being alone. Quiet. Peace. No one complaining, demanding, or accusing. But the silence didn't last long. On the last Saturday of July, Jessica woke up late, around 11. Brandon was already up, sitting in the kitchen with coffee. When she walked in, he looked up, and Jessica immediately knew something was wrong. His face was guilty, almost frightened. Good morning, Jessica said cautiously. Is something wrong? Brandon set his cup down and folded his hands on the table. Jess, I need to tell you something. Jessica poured herself some water and sat down across from him. I'm listening. Brandon took a deep breath. Mom called yesterday. We talked for a long time. Jessica nodded silently. She said that if we don't let them come to the coast, then she's disappointed in me. She said I'm a bad son. And I thought, maybe we should really make a small concession. Just a little? Brandon faltered. Brandon, how many times have we discussed this? Jessica asked. A lot, he admitted. But listen, maybe for 3 days? Just let them come for the weekend, see the ocean, and leave. It's not much time at all. No, Jessica said firmly. But why? Brandon's voice cracked. It's just 3 days, not a month. Because if I agree to 3 days, they'll stay for a week. Then 2. Then a month, Jessica explained slowly, like to a child. I know how this works. Give them a finger and they'll take your whole hand. Brandon was silent, staring at the table. Then he said quietly, Mom was crying real tears. That's manipulation, Jessica replied. She's pressuring you so you'll pressure me. Maybe she's really upset? Maybe, Jessica shrugged. But that's not my problem. Brandon looked up at her. How can you say that? Easily, Jessica answered. I'm tired of being convenient. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Brandon stood up and went into the bedroom. Jessica finished her water and looked out the window. Outside, the July heat was melting everything alive. And in 2 weeks, she would be on vacation. Ocean. Cool air. Freedom. She smiled. A few days passed. Brandon stayed gloomy and barely spoke. Jessica went about her business. Worked, cooked, planned the trip. She had already bought bus tickets, booked a taxi in Myrtle Beach, and made a grocery list. Everything was ready. And then what was bound to happen happened. One Wednesday evening, Jessica came home from work and heard Brandon's voice coming from the bedroom. He was on the phone, speaking quietly, almost conspiratorially. Jessica walked into the entryway, took off her shoes, and listened. Yes, Mom, I understand. No, she won't agree. I tried, I swear. Jessica hung up her jacket and walked into the kitchen. Brandon kept talking in the bedroom. Mom, what can I do? It's her apartment. No, I can't force her. Jessica washed her hands and put the kettle on. Brandon's voice grew louder, as if he'd forgotten to be careful. I get that you want it, but she's stubborn as. Yeah, like a mule. Jessica pressed her lips together. She stood by the stove, staring at the kettle, feeling something heavy and hot start to boil inside her. Listen, Mom, maybe it's really not worth it. Maybe next year? Come on, don't cry. Mom, enough. Jessica poured boiling water into a mug, dropped in a tea bag, stirred slowly and deliberately. Okay, Mom, I'll try talking to her again. Yes, I promise. All right, love you. Brandon came out of the bedroom, saw Jessica in the kitchen, and flinched. Oh, hey. I didn't hear you come in. You did, Jessica said without turning around. I heard you call me a mule. Brandon turned red. Jess, I didn't mean it like that. Not out of spite. Out of spite, Jessica corrected, turning to him. You complain about me to your mother, talk about me behind my back, call me stubborn, and think I won't find out? Brandon dropped his gaze. Mom started it herself. She's upset. Let her be upset, Jessica said evenly. I don't care. Brandon lifted his head. But I promised I'd try talking to you again. Try, Jessica crossed her arms. Go ahead. Try. Say that I have to let your mother into my apartment. Say that I should spend my vacation feeding her. Say that I'm a bad wife, a bad daughter-in-law, a bad person. Go on. Brandon stared at the floor. You can't. Jessica smirked. Then go call your mother and tell her the attempt failed. Brandon turned and went back into the bedroom. Jessica stayed in the kitchen, finishing her tea. Her hands were shaking, everything inside was churning, but she held on. Just a little more. Just a bit longer. The next few days passed in complete silence. Brandon stopped talking to her altogether. He got up in the morning, went to work, came back late, ate dinner in silence, and disappeared into the bedroom. Jessica didn't push. Silence felt calmer to her. On Friday, a week before departure, Jessica was at work, planning the final details. She ordered groceries for delivery in Myrtle Beach, chose the book she'd take with her, and booked a taxi. Everything was ready. All that was left was to make it to Saturday. That evening she came home and found Brandon in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with his phone in front of him, his face tense. Something happened? Jessica asked, hanging up her jacket. Brandon looked up. Mom called. Again? Jessica poured herself some water. She said she and Dad are going to the coast anyway. They'll rent an apartment near yours. Just to be close. Jessica took a sip of water. Let them rent. Brandon stood up. Jess, don't you get how crazy this looks? They're renting some insanely expensive place, and you're sitting in yours and not letting them in. It looks fair, Jessica corrected. It's my apartment, and I didn't invite anyone. Brandon stepped closer. Listen. Just once. One time. Let them come, at least for a couple of days. I'll buy everything, do everything. You won't have to lift a finger. Jessica set the glass down and turned to him. Brandon, you don't get the main thing. This isn't about money. It's about you giving away what's mine without asking. You make promises without consulting me. You put your family above me. That's the problem. But they're my parents. Brandon spread his hands. Your parents, Jessica repeated for the 100th time. Who never once called me to ask how I was doing. Who gave $200 and asked for it back. Who treat me like hired help. Why do I owe them anything? Brandon was silent. Exactly, Jessica said. I don't. Brandon paced the kitchen and stopped by the window. You know, Mom said she regrets that I married you. Let her regret it, Jessica replied indifferently. Brandon turned around. And you? Do you regret it? Jessica thought for a second. I don't know yet. Ask me in a month. Brandon went pale and left the kitchen. Jessica stayed by the window. Inside, there was nothing left. No anger. Just exhaustion and waiting. Saturday. One more week until departure. Jessica woke up early to the sound of a phone ringing. Unknown number. She declined it. A minute later, it rang again. She blocked the number. A third call from another number. Jessica answered. Hello? Jessica? Patricia's voice sounded metallic. It's me. We need to talk. Jessica sat up in bed. There's nothing to talk about, Patricia. Mistake, her mother-in-law said sharply. Because I have something important to tell you. Jessica stayed silent, waiting. You destroyed my family, Patricia continued. Brandon is miserable. He doesn't sleep, he doesn't eat. He's suffering. Because of you, because of your greed. That's not greed, Jessica said calmly. That's protecting my boundaries. Boundaries? Patricia snorted. You turned my son into a laughingstock. The whole family knows his wife won't let us into her apartment. Do you know how that looks? It looks honest, Jessica repeated. I didn't invite anyone. You're heartless. Patricia's voice trembled. We dreamed our whole lives of seeing the coast. We don't have money, and you have an apartment and won't let us rest. How can you? Very easily, Jessica replied. It's mine, not yours. Patricia was silent for a moment, then said quietly, almost threateningly, You'll regret this. We'll see. We'll see, Jessica replied and ended the call. She blocked the number, lay back down, and closed her eyes. Her heart was pounding, but she breathed slowly, calming herself. One more week. Just 1 week. Brandon woke up an hour later and came into the kitchen, where Jessica was drinking coffee. He sat down across from her. Did Mom call you? She did. What did she say? That I'm heartless and destroyed your family. Brandon rubbed his face with his hands. She's upset. Let her be upset. Jessica finished her coffee and stood up. I need to get ready. Get ready? Brandon looked up. Where are you going? To Lisa's. I'm helping with reports. She left. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. The days crawled by. Jessica worked, came home, avoided conversations with Brandon. He stayed silent too, gloomy and withdrawn. On Wednesday evening, Brandon tried to talk again. Jessica was making dinner when he came into the kitchen and leaned against the wall. Marina texted me. She says I'm a traitor and a coward. Jessica shrugged. She's right about the coward part. You can't protect me from your family. Brandon went pale. I tried. Not hard enough, Jessica replied. He slammed the door and went into the bedroom. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Jessica finished up her last tasks, checked her packing list, booked the taxi again. Everything was ready. Tomorrow evening, she was leaving. 2 weeks in Myrtle Beach. 2 weeks of freedom. Saturday evening, Brandon tried again. Jessica was sitting on the couch, checking the coastal weather forecast. Brandon sat next to her. Jess, let me at least go with you. Jessica didn't look up from her phone. For money? Brandon sighed. I can't pay $8,000, you know that. Then no, Jessica said. Brandon stood up and paced the room. I'll call my parents and tell them you're leaving alone. Tell them, Jessica replied. Brandon went into the entryway. Jessica heard him dial and say, Mom, hi. Yeah, everything's fine. Listen, I wanted to tell you. Jessica is leaving for the coast tomorrow. Alone. Yes, alone, I'm not going. Jessica kept looking at her phone but listened carefully. No, Mom, I can't force her. I know it hurts. Mom, what can I do? Brandon's voice sounded tired, almost guilty. Yes, I talked to her. Many times. She won't agree. Mom, please stop crying. Jessica closed the weather app, opened a book, and read without taking in the words, just to distract herself. Okay, Mom, I got it. Yes, I'll tell her. Love you. Brandon came back into the room, sat on the couch, and dropped his head into his hands. Mom says she doesn't want to talk to you anymore. Great, Jessica said, turning the page. That makes things easier for me. Brandon lifted his head and looked at her for a long moment. You really don't feel guilty? No, Jessica answered, meeting his gaze. Not at all. Brandon shook his head, stood up, and went into the bathroom. Jessica kept reading. The evening dragged on. Brandon sat at the computer. Jessica packed the last of her things, put clothes, toiletries, and books into the suitcase, checked documents, tickets, money. Everything was in place. They went to bed late. Brandon lay on his side of the bed, facing the wall. Jessica on hers, staring at the ceiling. They didn't say goodbye. Just lay there, each lost in their own thoughts. Sunday morning was cool. Jessica got up early, around 7. Brandon was still asleep. She quietly got ready, had breakfast, rolled the suitcase into the entryway, checked her documents, phone, and charger one last time. Brandon woke up as she was putting on her sneakers. He came into the entryway in sweatpants and a t-shirt, sleepy and rumpled. You're leaving already? Yes, Jessica said, tying her shoes. The taxi will be here in 5 minutes. Brandon leaned against the doorframe. Well, have a good vacation. Thanks. Jessica stood up and took the suitcase. Brandon stepped closer. Listen, maybe we can talk again? When you get back. Talk about what? Jessica asked. About us. The family. The parents. We'll talk, Jessica nodded. But the decision won't change. Brandon's shoulders sagged. Jessica almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Her phone beeped. A message from the driver. He was outside. Jessica opened the door, pulled the suitcase onto the landing, and turned back to Brandon. Bye. Bye, he replied quietly. Jessica closed the door, went downstairs, got into the taxi, and gave the bus station address. The car pulled away. Jessica watched houses, trees, and people slide past the window. Inside, everything was calm. For the first time in a long while, truly calm. The bus departed at noon. Jessica took her seat, stowed her suitcase, and sat by the window. The bus started moving. Platforms slid by, then suburbs, then open fields. Jessica took out her book and opened it at the bookmark. She read without stopping as the scenery changed outside the window. Chicago faded behind her. Ahead were beaches, the ocean, and freedom. The 2 days of travel flew by. Jessica read, slept, drank coffee, looked out the window. She didn't call Brandon once. He texted a couple of times. Did you get there okay? Everything all right? Jessica replied briefly. All good. On my way. The bus arrived in Myrtle Beach early in the morning. Jessica took her suitcase, stepped onto the platform, and got into the taxi she had ordered. They drove along the coast, past palm trees and small shops. Jessica looked out the window, breathing in the warm air that smelled of salt and sea. Myrtle Beach greeted her with sunshine and a light breeze. The driver dropped her off at the building and helped with the suitcase. Jessica went up to the 5th floor and unlocked the door to her apartment. She stepped inside, set the suitcase down, walked to the window, and threw it open. The smell of the ocean rushed in, along with the sound of waves and the cries of seagulls. Jessica stood by the window with her eyes closed, smiling. She had done it. 5 years. 5 years of sacrifice, denial, saving, and here it was. Her place. Her space. Her freedom. Her phone vibrated. A message from Brandon. "Did you make it?" Jessica replied, "Yes, everything's great." She put the phone down and went to unpack. The day passed in pleasant, simple tasks. Jessica unpacked her suitcase, went to the nearest store, bought groceries, and made a light dinner. Salad, cheese, wine. She sat on the balcony, eating slowly, savoring every bite, every sip. That night she lay down in bed. The fresh sheets smelled of the sea and sun. She fell asleep instantly, no dreams, no anxiety. The following days blended into one another. Wake up, breakfast on the balcony, a walk along the boardwalk, lunch, reading on the beach, dinner, wine, sunset. Jessica didn't rush anywhere, didn't plan anything. She simply lived and enjoyed herself. Brandon wrote occasionally, asked how she was doing, complained about the heat in Chicago. Jessica answered briefly. She didn't want to think about Chicago, about her husband, about problems. Here by the ocean, everything felt different, lighter, freer. A week passed. Jessica got a tan, relaxed, felt the tension that had built up for months leave her body. She read book after book, walked along the beach, swam in the ocean, chatted with neighbors-friendly retirees who came here every year. She drank wine on the balcony, listening to the waves. On Friday evening, as Jessica sat on the balcony with a book, her phone rang. "Brandon." She answered. "Yeah." "Hi." Brandon sounded tired. "How are you?" "Good," Jessica said. "And you?" "Fine. Working. It's hot here." Silence. "Listen," Brandon finally said, "I was thinking. Maybe I could still come. Just for a couple of days?" Jessica closed her book. "For money?" Brandon sighed. "Jess, seriously?" "Absolutely," Jessica replied. "All right," Brandon said quietly. "I get it. I won't come." "That's the right decision," Jessica said. They said goodbye. Jessica put the phone down and opened her book. Inside, everything was calm. A few more days passed. Jessica stopped counting time. The days merged into one long vacation. She woke up when she wanted, ate when she wanted, slept when she wanted. No one demanded anything. No one asked. No one pressured her. On Wednesday, 2 days before leaving, Jessica sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset. Her phone lay beside her, the screen dark. She hadn't called Brandon in 3 days. And he hadn't called her. Suddenly the phone vibrated. A message. "Brandon, we need to have a serious talk. When are you back?" Jessica read it, put the phone down, finished her wine, and looked at the ocean. She knew what the conversation would be about, and she knew what she would say. But that would come later. Right now, there was the sunset, wine, and silence. On Thursday, Jessica walked along the boardwalk, wandered into small shops, bought souvenirs for herself, not for anyone else. She ate ice cream, sat on a bench, watched the sea. It was good. Calm. That evening she packed. Tomorrow was the trip back. 2 weeks had flown by. Jessica folded her clothes into the suitcase, checked that she hadn't forgotten anything. Her phone vibrated again. "Brandon, Mom asked me to tell you that you're selfish." Jessica smirked and replied, "Tell her I don't care." She sent it and blocked the chat. Friday. The last day. Jessica woke up early and had breakfast on the balcony one last time. She walked through the apartment, checking that everything was in order. Closed the windows, turned off the lights, grabbed her suitcase. Went downstairs and got into a taxi. They drove through the city toward the bus station. Jessica looked out the window, memorizing the streets, the houses, the sea. She would definitely come back. Definitely. The bus left at noon. Jessica took her seat, stowed her suitcase, and sat by the window. The bus pulled away. Myrtle Beach faded behind her. The 2-day trip back felt long. Jessica read, dozed, thought about what came next, about Brandon, about family, about herself. The bus arrived in Chicago on Sunday evening. Jessica got off, took her suitcase, caught a taxi, rode through the evening city, looking at familiar streets, buildings, people. Chicago greeted her with heat and chaos. They pulled up to the building. Jessica paid, took her suitcase, went upstairs, unlocked the door, stepped into the entryway. Quiet. Brandon apparently hadn't returned from work yet. Jessica changed, set the suitcase down, went to the kitchen, poured herself water, drank, sat at the table, and dropped her head into her hands. Exhaustion hit all at once. Half an hour later, Brandon came in, saw her in the kitchen, and nodded. "Hey. You're back." "I'm back," Jessica replied. Brandon went into the room, dropped his bag, came back. "How was your vacation?" "Good," Jessica said. "Very good." Brandon sat across from her and folded his hands on the table. "We need to talk." Jessica looked up. "I'm listening." Brandon took a deep breath. "While you were gone, I thought a lot. About us. About family. About what's been happening." Jessica stayed silent, waiting. "And I realized," Brandon continued slowly, "that you're right. I behaved badly. I made promises without asking you. I put my parents above you. That was messed up." Jessica nodded. "It was." "I'm sorry," Brandon said quietly. "I was an idiot." Jessica looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Brandon, I accept your apology. But it doesn't change anything." He looked up. "What do you mean, it doesn't change anything?" "The apartment stays mine. Your relatives will never go there. Ever," Jessica said firmly. "It's my space, my freedom, and I'm not sharing it with anyone." Brandon nodded. "I understand. I won't push it anymore." "Good," Jessica said. "Then we're agreed." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Brandon stood up. "I'm going to take a shower." Jessica stayed at the kitchen table, looking out at the evening Chicago skyline. Inside, she felt calm. She had stood her ground. She had protected her boundaries. No one would ever dare to control her life again. Her phone vibrated. A message from Patricia. Brandon said, "You're back. I hope you rested well. We never made it to the ocean. Thanks to you." Jessica read it, deleted it, and blocked the number. She stood up and went to unpack. Life went on. But the next day, everything changed. And it changed in a way Jessica would remember forever. Monday. Jessica went to work. Brandon did too. That evening they came home almost at the same time. They had dinner in the kitchen, talked about nothing, work, weather, news. Brandon was calm, even cheerful. Jessica felt wary. That kind of behavior was suspicious. After dinner, Brandon went into the bedroom, saying he needed to call his parents. Jessica stayed in the kitchen, washing dishes, and heard him talking on the phone, first quietly, then louder. "Yes, Mom, everything's fine." "Jess is back," she rested. "No, Mom, I already told you she doesn't agree." Jessica dried her hands and froze in the doorway, listening. "Mom, I tried, I swear. I get it. Listen, let's not start this again." Brandon's voice grew irritated. "Mom, enough already. I've explained this 100 times." Jessica heard him pacing the room, phone pressed to his ear, rubbing the back of his head with his free hand. "What difference does it make who owns it? We're family." "Mom, it's her apartment." Jessica stood frozen, listening as Brandon kept talking. His voice sounded more confident now, as if he had completely forgotten she was in the next room. "Mom, listen, I was thinking. Maybe we can still work something out. I'll try talking to her again, more gently." Something tightened inside Jessica. A week ago he had apologized, said he understood how wrong he'd been. And now it was starting all over again. No, Mom, I'm not afraid of her, Brandon continued, false bravado creeping into his voice. She's just stubborn. But I'll find a way, don't worry. Jessica stepped into the room. Brandon was still standing with his back to her, staring out the window. Or maybe this, he went on. You come in September, when it's off-season. I'll tell Jess it's a surprise, that you already bought tickets, and she won't be able to say no. A chill ran down Jessica's spine. He was planning to corner her. Again. After everything. Yes, that's exactly what we'll do, Brandon said enthusiastically. Come on, Mom and Dad, bring all the grandkids to her little place by the ocean until fall if you want. My wife will take unpaid vacation and feed everyone. He said the last words loudly, almost triumphantly, as if he could already see it happening. He turned around and ran straight into Jessica's gaze. The smile vanished from his face instantly. The phone froze at his ear. Silence filled the room. Only Patricia's voice came from the speaker. Brandon, can you hear me? There was something in Jessica's eyes that made Brandon instinctively step back. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't waving her arms. She was just looking at him. And that look was scarier than any scream. 1 second. 2. Then Jessica stepped forward. Not fast. Not sharply. Almost slowly. She simply took a step and pushed Brandon in the chest with her palm. Not hard but firm. Brandon staggered back, tripped over the threshold between the room and the entryway, flailed his arms trying to keep his balance. The phone flew from his hand. Brandon slammed back first into the entryway wall, hitting the back of his head. Not painfully but humiliatingly. He slid down the wall to the floor, clutching his head. The phone clattered onto the hardwood floor. From the speaker came Patricia's panicked voice. Brandon! What happened? Jessica picked the phone up from the floor and calmly brought it to her ear. Patricia, you heard something wrong. Her mother-in-law fell silent for a second, then snapped, Jessica. What's going on? Where is Brandon? Brandon is perfectly fine, Jessica replied evenly. And I'll explain the situation to you one last time. No one is going anywhere. The apartment is mine. I bought it with my money, which I saved for 5 years while your son spent his salary on beer and sneakers. Your son is not invited there. And you? Especially not. How dare you? Patricia shrieked. I'm his mother. You're the mother who gave $200 for the wedding and asked for it back a month later, Jessica cut in coldly. Who never visited us once in 3 years. Who constantly hints that I'm a bad daughter-in-law, despite never once cooking us even a pot of soup. So, Patricia, I don't care what you think of me. I don't care what Dennis, Marina, or the other 15 members of your family say. My apartment is mine. Period. You destroyed our family. Patricia's voice broke into hysterics. Brandon, do you hear what she's saying? Jessica looked at Brandon, who was still sitting on the floor, rubbing the back of his head. His face looked confused, almost childlike. Yes, Brandon hears, Jessica said into the phone. And I hope he's finally understood that making promises at someone else's expense is a very bad idea. I'm going to sue you. Patricia screamed. For hitting my son. I didn't hit him, Jessica corrected calmly. I gave him a light shove. And if you want to sue, go right ahead. While you're at it, explain to the judge why your adult son thinks it's normal to control someone else's property without permission. She tapped the red button and ended the call. Then she tossed the phone to Brandon. He caught it with both hands, clutching it to his chest. What are you doing? Brandon's voice finally came back, shooting up an octave. My mom heard everything. You just said all that to her. The truth, Jessica finished for him. I told her the truth you were too scared to say for 3 years. Brandon struggled to his feet, still holding his head. But they're my parents. They just wanted to relax. At my expense. Jessica stepped closer, and Brandon instinctively pressed his back against the wall. You decide how to use my property, my vacation, my money, my time. Without asking. You seriously thought I'd spend 3 months feeding your family of 15 on my $2,000 salary, the same money you call pocket change? I thought we had an agreement, Brandon muttered, avoiding her eyes. We agreed you would stop making promises at my expense, Jessica said sharply. 1 week. Just 1 week and you're already making plans to shove your relatives in there again. But my mom is upset, Brandon tried weakly. Let her be upset. Jessica crossed her arms. Your mother is a grown woman. If she wants the ocean, she can save for it the way I did. 5 years. No manicures. No new clothes. No vacations. Weekend side jobs for $100. Thrift store blouses. Then maybe she'll be able to afford the coast. But their pension is small, Brandon tried to defend her. They have a pension, Jessica corrected. Which is still more than zero. They could have saved. They chose not to. They spend their money how they want and then expect someone else to solve their problems. I am not that someone. Brandon stared at the floor. You know what pisses me off the most? Jessica continued, her voice growing colder. Not that you promised them my apartment, but that even after all the talks, all the apologies, you still don't get the main thing. You still think you have the right to run my life. That what's mine is ours, and what's yours is just yours. That's not true, Brandon mumbled, without conviction. It is, Jessica snapped. When you bought yourself a $1,600 phone, did you ask me? No. When you go to the bar every Friday and spend $60, do you check with me? No. But when it comes to my apartment bought with my money, you suddenly think you can hand it out to whoever you want. Brandon clenched his fists, his face turning red. I thought we were a family. That everything was shared. Shared means discussed, Jessica said coldly. Not one person handing things out and the other cleaning up the mess. You want everything shared? Fine. Let's share your salary. $3,200 split in half. $1,600 for me, $1,600 for you. Deal? Brandon went pale. But I pay the rent, utilities - you pay $1,000 for a 1-bedroom, Jessica cut in. Utilities are $200. Groceries $400 once a month, and not even consistently. The rest is your beer, your sneakers, your bars. Out of my $2,000, I pay for my food, my clothes, household stuff, and save $1,300. So don't tell me you support the family. Brandon opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again and said nothing. Exactly. Jessica turned and walked into the kitchen. Think about it. And never, do you hear me, never make promises at my expense again. She poured herself water and drank it in one gulp. Her hands were shaking, everything inside was boiling, but on the outside, she was calm. Brandon didn't follow her. Jessica heard him stomp into the bedroom and slam the door. About 10 minutes passed. Jessica sat in the kitchen, staring out the window. Outside, it was getting dark. Streetlights came on, people walked by. A normal evening in ordinary Chicago. But for Jessica, this evening was a turning point. She understood that something between them had broken for good. And she didn't regret it. The bedroom door creaked open. Brandon came into the kitchen. His face was pale, his eyes read clearly he had called his mother and gotten another round of accusations. He sat across from Jessica and folded his hands on the table. My mom is crying. She says you insulted her and that she wants nothing more to do with us. Great, Jessica replied indifferently. That's exactly what I was aiming for. Brandon looked up. You really want to destroy my relationship with my family? Jessica smirked. I'm not destroying anything. I'm protecting my boundaries. If your family can't accept the fact that I own something and get to decide what happens to it, that's their problem, not mine. Brandon rubbed his face with his hands. You know, I was thinking. Maybe we should get divorced. Jessica was silent for a few seconds, processing his words. Then she nodded calmly. Maybe we should. Brandon flinched, clearly not expecting that answer. You're serious? Absolutely, Jessica said. If you believe your mother matters more than I do. If you can't stand up for me in front of your family, if you promise to change over and then do the same thing again, then yes, divorce might be the best option. Brandon went even paler. I didn't think you'd agree. You thought I'd be scared and give in, Jessica said harshly. You thought I'd bend again, like I did for 3 years. But no, Brandon. Those days are over. I've learned to value myself. And I'm not going to live with someone who doesn't respect my boundaries. Brandon stared at the table. I don't want a divorce, he said quietly. Then change your behavior, Jessica replied. Right now. And permanently. How? Jessica stood up, went to the drawer, took out the printed apartment documents, and placed them in front of him. Look. Owner, Jessica Miller. See it? That means decisions about this apartment are made by me. Only me. Not you. Not your mother. Not your brother or sister. Brandon nodded without looking up. Second, Jessica continued. You never discuss me with your mother again. You don't complain about me, you don't paint me as the villain. If you have a problem with me, you talk to me, not to your mom. Okay, Brandon whispered. Third, Jessica sat back down and looked him straight in the eyes. If you want to stay in my apartment by the ocean, you pay. Like everyone else. $600 a day. Market rate. No discounts. Brandon looked up. Even for me? Even for you, Jessica confirmed. Because after today, I don't trust you anymore. You proved you're willing to give away my property without asking. So now you pay like a stranger. Brandon was silent, then asked, what if I can't afford it? Then you don't go, Jessica said simply. I'll go alone, like I did this time. Brandon clenched his fists on the table. That's cruel. That's fair, Jessica corrected. You wanted 15 people from your family to go there at my expense. I'm setting terms, everyone pays for themselves including you. Where's the cruelty? Brandon didn't answer. He just sat there, staring at the table. Jessica could see the struggle in his head. Part of him wanted to lash out, accuse her of greed and heartlessness. But another part, the one that still had some common sense left, knew she was right. Finally, he looked up. Okay. I agree. To everything? Jessica asked. To everything, Brandon nodded. Good. Jessica took the documents and put them back in the drawer. Then consider this your second chance. The last one. Brandon stood up, walked toward the door, then turned back. What do I tell my mom? The truth, Jessica said. That the apartment is mine. That no one from your family is going there. And that if she wants to vacation by the ocean, she needs to save for it herself. She won't understand, Brandon said tiredly. That's her problem, Jessica replied. Not mine. And not yours. Brandon nodded and went into the bedroom. Jessica stayed in the kitchen, staring out the window. Inside, there was nothing left, not even anger. Just cold calm. That evening, Brandon talked to his mother on the phone for a long time. Jessica heard fragments of the conversation. He tried to explain that Jessica wouldn't change her mind, that it was her right, that they needed to accept it. Patricia screamed so loudly that Jessica could hear her even through the closed door. Then Brandon raised his voice. For the first time in 3 years, Jessica heard him speak to his mother harshly. Mom, enough. It's her apartment, and she decides. I'm not asking anymore. After that, there was silence. Apparently, Patricia had hung up. Brandon came out of the room pale and drained, walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and drank it in one gulp. My mom said I'm a traitor, he said quietly, staring at the glass. That I chose my wife over my family. You chose common sense, Jessica corrected. And that was the right choice. Brandon looked at her for a long moment. You're not afraid I might leave anyway? Jessica shrugged. You leave? I'll survive. You stay? I'll be glad. But only if you actually change. Brandon nodded and left the kitchen. Jessica stayed sitting alone. Night fell outside. The city drifted to sleep. The next day, Brandon left for work without a word. Jessica did too. They barely spoke, exchanging only what was necessary. That evening, Brandon came home with a bag of groceries, vegetables, chicken, bread, and set it on the table. I figured I should help with dinner. Jessica nodded. Thanks. They cooked together, for the first time in a long while. Brandon chopped vegetables, Jessica cooked the meat. They didn't talk much, but the tension wasn't as sharp as the day before. They ate together too, discussing work, the news. Not a word about the coast, the relatives, or the conflict. A week passed. Patricia didn't call either Brandon or Jessica. The relatives stayed quiet too. Apparently, they understood there was no point. Brandon didn't change overnight, but gradually. He started asking if help was needed, bought groceries without being reminded. He stopped complaining about Jessica to his mother. Once, Patricia called in the evening, and Jessica heard Brandon answer briefly. "Mom, everything's fine." "No, I'm not discussing that." "No, let's talk about something else." Jessica watched these changes and didn't know whether to believe them. Too many promises had been made before, too many broken. But she decided to give him a chance. The last one. At the end of August, closer to evening, Brandon came home from work with a strange look on his face, nervous but determined. He walked into the kitchen, where Jessica was washing dishes, and placed an envelope on the table. "What's this?" Jessica asked, drying her hands. "Open it," Brandon said. Jessica opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of bills. She counted them. $1,200. "That's for 2 days at the coast," Brandon said quietly. "In September, if you're okay with it." Jessica looked at the money, then at him. "You're serious?" "Absolutely," Brandon nodded. "I picked up a weekend side job. 1 more month and I'll have enough for a week. I want to go with you. The right way. No fights. No relatives. Just the two of us." Jessica was silent for a few seconds. Then she put the money back in the envelope and handed it to him. "Take it back." Brandon looked confused. "Why?" "Because I'm forgiving you those 2 days," Jessica said gently. "You proved you changed, that you understood, and I'm willing to give you a chance." Brandon stood there holding the envelope, his eyes turning red. "Really?" "Really," Jessica nodded. "But if you ever again promise my apartment to anyone without asking, it's over. I'll divorce you and won't look back. Got it?" He stepped toward her and hugged her awkwardly, carefully, as if afraid she might push him away. Jessica didn't. She stood there for a few seconds, then gently pulled back. "All right. Let's have dinner. And in September, we'll go together." "Together," Brandon repeated, and for the first time in a long while, a real smile appeared on his face. September in Myrtle Beach was warm and quiet. There were fewer tourists, the ocean was calm, the air smelled of salt and early fall. Jessica and Brandon went for a week. They stayed in her apartment, walked the boardwalk, took excursions, had dinner at small cafes. They didn't fight, didn't argue, just rested. One evening, as they sat on the balcony with glasses of wine, Brandon said, "You know, I realized something. I spent my whole life trying to please my parents, to be a good son, and almost lost my wife because of it." Jessica took a sip of wine and stayed quiet. "Now I know what matters more," Brandon continued, looking at the ocean. "My parents will manage without me. But you. I don't want to lose you." "Then don't," Jessica said simply. Brandon nodded. They sat in silence, listening to the waves. A few days later, they returned to Chicago. Life went on. Work, routine, evening conversations in the kitchen. Patricia called rarely, and Brandon learned to say no. The relatives stopped writing to Jessica altogether, apparently having finally accepted it. Jessica didn't feel victorious. Only calm. She had defended what was hers, protected her boundaries, and maybe saved her marriage. A month passed. Then another. Life slowly but steadily improved. Brandon became more attentive, more responsible. Jessica became softer, more trusting. They were learning to be a family again. One day in November, when the first snow already lay outside, Brandon asked, "So, What if next summer we go back to the coast again? Together? Jessica thought for a moment, then nodded. Okay. Just the two of us. Just the two of us, Brandon agreed. Forever. Jessica smiled. 5 years of saving had been worth it. The apartment by the ocean wasn't just property, it was her freedom, her boundary, her right to say no. And she would never, ever let anyone take that away from her again. She looked out the window at the falling snow and thought about summer, the ocean, the warm breeze on the balcony, about how she would go there again, maybe with Brandon, maybe alone, and that it would be her choice. Only hers. And Brandon sat nearby, scrolling on his phone, unaware that a few minutes earlier Patricia had sent Jessica one last message: "You took my son away from me." Jessica read it, smirked, and blocked the number forever. She hadn't taken anything away. She had simply taught him how to be a husband, not a mama's boy.